So I think we all know that the Sixers have had a very, very rough year with Embiid's multitude of injuries, Paul George hyperextending his knee twice and not playing very well, Tyrese Maxey's struggles and his hamstring injury, and then obviously the most recent crushing blow being Jared McCain's torn meniscus that will have him out for most of, if not the rest entirety of the NBA season. They've had a rough year, very, very clearly, but they're quietly playing pretty good. They're 6-2 in their last 8 games. And look, I know beating Detroit, Charlotte, Orlando without Paulo and Franz, Chicago, Charlotte again, not like the most impressive wins ever. Paulo actually, or I think Franz might have been playing in that second Orlando game they won. But in general, I mean, it's not the most impressive 6-game stretch of wins, but 6-2 in your last 8 games is serious progress. Going from 3-14 to now 9-16. They're starting to reestablish themselves number 1 in that Eastern Conference playoff race. And I think that's a big thing. It's just a big positive step for the Sixers team. They're starting to put things together. The question is it sustainable, and can they do it at a high enough level to re-enter their names into a team that we at least should be paying attention to in the Eastern Conference when it comes to the playoffs, and not just paying attention to because they're a soap opera. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing as we progress into this second third of the season, start pushing towards the trade deadline, seeing what this Sixers team becomes now without Jared McCain for likely the rest of the regular season, at least, if not longer. With that being said, before we hop into it and break this down, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Help me push towards the 2,000 subscriber mark on the channel. I upload every single day, multiple videos a day. Would really appreciate it if y'all do subscribe. Without further ado, tonight they win against a bad Charlotte Hornets team that again did not have LaMelo Ball. So you can't put too much stock into that. But Embiid did have a 34-9, 12-24, 2-4 from 3, made his free throws, like solid performance, not bad at all. Tyrese Maxey, another pretty efficient performance. He's played well as of late, had 40 points in a win earlier this week as well. Paul George, 2 of 12, 1 of 7 from 3, 5 points. He's been better as of late as well. Was not tonight. Very, very rough game. He did have 10 rebounds, 8 assists, only 2 turnovers. But besides that, it was not a great game for PG&E, the worst plus minus by far of all the starters. My biggest issue with this team is not really the starting lineup when healthy. My questions with this team are depth and effort. I think those are your biggest 2 concerns for this team. I mean, I watched them play against the Pacers, last weekend when Embiid originally suffered that facial fracture and when Jared McCain, I guess, got hurt as well, although we weren't aware of it during the game. But I watched that game pretty much in its entirety. And my takeaway from that game was that the Sixers are just a step slow. And I just realistically have thought that has been one of the biggest issues for this team all year, but they're starting to win some basketball games. I feel like they're starting to play better, starting to find their way a little bit on the court. And the question really becomes, can they sustain it? Because the biggest question at the end of the day is depth. I mean, you look at guys like Andre Drummond, Kyle Lowry, Caleb Barton, just having really bad years, offensively and defensively, not really being the contributors you'd hope they'd be. I mean, obviously, we know Drummond's not a great defender at this point in his career. He's just a rebounder, and he was never really a great defender. Kyle Lowry has just gotten to the point where he's too dang old, I feel like, to be a real contributor. And unfortunately, Caleb Martin has just had a rough year. So when you look at this team beyond their starting 5, basically, and Yabusele, they're in a rough spot. Now, KJ Martin has been a massive, massive asset to this team. Let's not overlook that. He's now starting for the Sixers, and deservedly so. I mean, he deserves to play a lot of minutes. I know he's not a super big scoring threat, but offensively, he's a really high effort player, great cutter. Same thing defensively. I mean, he improves your rebounding ability, improves your effort. I think defensively, he's a solid player, and he's had a really good offensive impact in his on-off numbers this season. And so has Yabusele. So that is my biggest concern for this team, though, is when you look at the roster, it's these 5 guys, because Oubre is good too, Yabusele, and then are we trusting Ricky Council? I mean, Eric Gordon, is that your guy? Kyle Lowry and Reggie Jackson are your backup point guards. You don't have Jared McCain anymore. Like, Drummond's your backup center. You don't have another real good option besides that. Like, they just have some serious bench questions because I don't even know how they get to 8 deep when it comes to a real playoff series. I get really sketched out about the way that this roster looks at this point in most of these guys' careers, especially these older dudes, Drummond, Lowry, Eric Gordon, Reggie Jackson. That's the problem here. If they want to compete, they're going to have to figure out a way to add to this roster or get real contributions from guys that I just don't think of right now as legit contributors at this point in their careers, whatever that may mean. But when you get Embiid back and what Embiid has the capability of being, you immediately will be thrust back into that discussion in the Eastern Conference, especially with them playing better as of late. And I think that's something that is 100% worth keeping an eye on. So I'm going to pull up the standings real quickly. As you look at it right now, they are 9-16, but they are only one game back of the Nets for the 10 seed in the play-in now. In all honesty, the Nets are just fully tanking, having traded Dennis Schroeder and likely eventually going to trade one or both of Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith as well. The Bulls would not be surprised if they decide to tank at some point this year, although they've played well as of late. They beat Boston yesterday. That was bizarre. But either way, the play-in is not far off, despite how bad the start to the season was. And so they feel like a very safe bet still as a playoff team, realistically. Because I do think they would likely be the best team in the play-in, probably, overall. And I don't know. I look at this team and I'm like, they're starting to play better, but I have a lot of question marks still about what they can do as the season progresses. Now, again, to defend that point about them having played better as of late, when you look at the season-long numbers, they have the third worst offensive rating in the entire league. Defensive rating-wise, it's not great either. They're only 12th. They have the 12th best. So I guess not horrible, but offensively, it's been a total disaster. Defensively, it hasn't been a total disaster, but it hasn't been awesome. And when you look at the net rating for the season, they're now up to only the 8th worst net rating in the league. It was closer to the bottom 5, but it has gotten better as of late. And when you look at the numbers in their last 8 games, again, not the toughest competition, but it is worth keeping in mind. They have had the 15th best offensive rating in the league. It's not game-changingly amazing, but again, you've only gotten a couple of Embiid games there, not all of them fully healthy. And defensively, they've been better as of late as well. So they've gone from a league worst offense pretty much to a solid average offense that will likely be above average if they can keep Embiid healthy, keep Paul George healthy, keep Tyrese Maxey healthy. Because again, that's going to be the crucial key, especially without Jared McCain. Those 3 guys have to stay healthy. If they don't stay healthy, I think you can pretty much put a kibosh on this team having the chance to do much of anything. But if those guys can stay healthy, they can be a really good team. They're 6th in defensive rating in those last 8 games. Like, again, I know the competition level hasn't been incredible recently, but they are starting to play better basketball all the way around. I still have faith in Nick Nurse that he's a good coach. I think some of these additions, guys like Yabusele and KJ Martin, have been huge pieces, but they will really, I think they're really going to hurt for that scoring punch backup guard off the bench, which is really, really tough. A few years ago, that would have been Eric Gordon, even maybe just a couple years ago. I just don't think it is anymore. Kyle Lowry's not the same player he once was. And the one thing that I will say that does concern me about this team, I'm not sure it matters that much because they're probably a play-in team no matter what, but realistically, if you're a play-in team, you want to be the 7 or 8 seed, right? So that you get 2 games instead of 1. I would think that's their goal at this point, is to be a 7 or 8 seed. I mean, 6 seed isn't that unachievable, right? When you look at the standings, I mean, they're only 4 games back of the 6 seed. It's not impossible, but I'm not sure it's super likely. I, again, would not write it off, especially if they stay healthy. But my biggest concern is when you look at the standings, or sorry, the strength of schedule. I mean, every single Eastern Conference team except for Indiana, who somehow has an absolute gauntlet, and then much further lower down the list, Detroit and New York. Outside of those 3 teams, they have the hardest schedule remaining in the East. New York is going to be higher up in the standings. I don't think that's a team they have to really compete against. But Indiana and Detroit are the only 2 teams that they're kind of competing against that have harder schedules than they do for the rest of the season. And so their schedule's tough, which I will say is going to be a good thing as we get to see what this team is actually made of as the season progresses. They got 2 more games against Cleveland, 2 games against OKC, 4 games against Boston, 2 games against Dallas, 3 games against the Knicks. They got a lot of games against these top tier teams in both the East and the West. And I think it's going to give us a good opportunity to see this team against different squads, different looks, see what they can look like speed wise as the season progresses. If they can kind of catch up and look more competitive against these top tier offenses, that's going to be something I'm interested to see, especially against a team like Cleveland or OKC. If they can be healthy for those matchups, that'll be a fun test to see what this team is really made of on the defensive end of the court. And also if their offense can score at a high enough level, especially against an elite defensive team like OKC. It's just going to be interesting to see as the season progresses what Sixers team winds up being the real Sixers. You know what I mean? Because as the season started, it was a total disaster, but there have been so many injuries and so many other circumstances and locker room problems and whatever else you may say this season that have been a real issue. Now, they don't have to worry quite as much about that anymore. So I'm interested to see how the season progresses and what starts to come of this year if they can keep their 3 guys healthy and stay healthy as mainly as a roster. Still don't love this team. Still don't think they're winning a title or anything like that, but they're starting to play better. And I thought it was worth talking about and kind of previewing what the rest of the season could look like. With that being said, that's going to do it for this video. I hope y'all did enjoy. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. I'll be back with more NBA content very, very soon, and I appreciate y'all. Peace.